Hi, Tom.
Hey Rhonda, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Hello, everybody. This is People Major Big Ideas. I am your host, Rhonda Lee Chapman, and I'm thrilled to be here talking with my executive producer, Tom, with Pretty Good Productions. Today, we're going to talk about our most recent episode that is focused on a TPL campaign called Happiest Outside.
That's right. Yeah, we've got 3 interviews this month. Why did we pick these folks in the context of this Happiest Outside campaign? Can you give us a little context for that?
Yeah, I can give you a little context. I mean, for one thing, anytime we go outside, it makes us happier and it makes us healthier and it helps us feel better connected. So I was thinking about my friend CJ Golding, and he is the co founder and the executive director of an organization called Boys in the Wood. Is that whole effort uses the outdoors to help Black men have connections with themselves, to have connections with each other, and really building a strong level of mental health that just inspires me. And then the other person I wanted to talk to is a woman named Deborah Williams. She is our editorial director here at TPL, and she's a very generous thinker, and she's also very compassionate. And it turns out that she also is a mom of 2 children, and one of whom is a soon to be 12-year-old boy with autism and ADHD. And I had heard that they have this practice of going to a farm. It's a form of horse therapy. I think another element of that I appreciated is when we're talking about being in the outdoors and connecting with nature, we aren't talking about horses very often. So I was also
No.
appreciative of
Horses have never come up on the show, I don't think.
not once, not once. And then lastly, hopefully folks remember from our very first episode almost 2 years ago with Tyke James. And we were talking about birding, and we were talking about freedom birders and black birders. And Tyke has also moved to Denver, Colorado. So he's another, East Coast transplant. And he's just my brother in so many ways. And so I wanted to have an opportunity to bring some of his joy and some of his brilliance into this conversation to talk about how he's happiest outside as well. So, yeah.
Great. Well, why don't we get to the interviews, and we'll circle back at the end.
Okay, that sounds great.
Do you have any favorite vocal warm-ups?
Watermelon, peas, and carrots, watermelon, peas, and carrots, watermelon, peas, and carrots. Watermelon, peas, and carrots.
What I like about watermelon, peas, and carrots is watermelon, peas, and carrots. And watermelon, peas, carrots, watermelon, peas, and carrots. A million mallards, maybe. How many do you see? A million mallards, maybe.
A million mallards, maybe. Maybe a million a million mallard. Very hard. Tyke, I love that we know each other. And what I really love is we also have a story that is interesting to me that's coming to mind right now in this moment, is that we are both living in the Denver metropolitan area after relocating from the DC metropolitan area. And we just increased the Black population for the state of Colorado
easily.
by
Easily.
2 people.
Easily. It could be doubled. I haven't done the numbers yet. I haven't crunched the numbers, but that 2030 census is that graph on the 2030 census is going to shoot up. And
You're welcome,
in part it's
Colorado.
because of us. Yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Colorado.
We're doing what we can. We're keeping Colorado colorful. I think that's part of, you can't spell Colorado without color.
You can't.
So that's part of why we're here.
And I think in return, Colorado is giving us the mountains. And so
not a bad trade. It's not a bad trade.
It's reciprocal.
Yeah,
I'm super grateful. What I want to talk to you about is coming back to birding, and it's still a part of your life, I believe. And again, this is about being happiest outside. And I want to know, and the audience wants to know, is birding still something that truly brings you some of your happiest moments when you're outside?
Absolutely. Birding brings me so much joy. Birding is an opportunity to share a moment with nature. And I love birding with folks, and sharing that moment with folks is always incredible. It's something that we always talk about when we meet up again, or we share pictures, or we talk about going back to the same place. birding is that special thing where you can truly share it. And birding is certainly shared through stories, not just the experience itself. And sharing stories about birds ultimately is what makes you a birder. Not just knowing all the birds or going to all the places, it's sharing those stories. And so I feel like the best birder. I feel happiest outside when I'm sharing those stories about birds.
I love it. Um, One of the things that I'm curious about, and I don't know if any of this has changed since you've moved to Denver, but when we first had our conversation, we talked about the some of the movement work that you've been doing in the birding space. We talked about black birders or freedom birds. We talked about how, there was this great work being done to connect that to some of the leadership that we learned about with the civil rights movement and the bus boycotts and some of the incredible blueprints that were laid out and how you were able to kind of captivate you and your peers, your friends, your homies were able to kind of capture that knowledge and apply it to the birding sector, to the practice, to the love, to the activity, I guess. Can you say a little bit about kind of how you would like to see this birding movement continue to evolve in response to some of the pressures that we're seeing on society right now, or some of the conditions that seem slow to change or might not even be moving at all?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest challenges in birding is a very stuck and rigid form of introduction to it. And that introduction often is the khakied, well groomed or not, socially otherwise individual, mostly male, who has this ability and privilege to travel the world to watch birds and know all of these things about birds, especially the know-it-all function or the know-it-all feature of a birder is, I think, a popularly seen one. And while we have seen more introductions, we haven't seen more different introductions with a little bit of this, a little bit of that being different. And those little bit of differences make a huge difference when we see that Christian Cooper's Extraordinary Birder won a daytime Emmy, on one season, and I happened to be featured in one of the episodes. So highly recommend checking out your local streaming service for Nat Geo Wild's Christian Cooper's Extraordinary Birder. Um, but I see that there's a lot of opportunities for more different introductions. Black Birders Week was that triggering event that, it was not a moment that we picked, but it was an occasion that we rose to show that the Black experience went beyond trauma. It includes joy, pride, resistance, strength, and style. It was Black Birders Week that then inspired a Marvel Cinematic Universe amount of other Black in excellence inspired weeks, and that was incredible to see. Part of what it's also inspired, even from a specific discussion during Black Birders Week with Christian Cooper, was about no-go zones and a lot of those being in the South. A friend of mine emailed me talking about how the Freedom Riders went from the North to the South to, for a lot of reasons, campaign wise, like to enforce the Supreme Court ruling on integrating bus terminals, but mostly to build that racial solidarity of having Black folks and white folks on a bus together traveling in the US. My friend asked, Jeffrey Train, he asked, what if we did a trip like that? What if we did a trip like that where we talked about, birding for justice, birding for freedom, and we called it the Freedom Birders Project. And, I've been working with Jeffrey for the last couple of years. I got my license a couple of years ago. So that is an important milestone that makes it possible. Still raising funds, still trying to figure out what that means. But when we're still thinking about the ways in which we want to introduce folks to birding, an education project that I came up with, I believe, last year, started with this idea of birding for the bold. What does it mean to be a bold birder? And I think part of that boldness is that new way to introduce folks. So, birding beyond the binary. Big fan of alliteration, had to do it that way. But what it really means is, can we introduce folks to birding in a way that doesn't reinforce the gender binary? Can we introduce birding to folks in a way that doesn't rely on them projecting human behaviors and human beliefs and understandings onto these birds? Where we can teach fun facts like woodpeckers, they often split nest sitting responsibilities. So the female may do it in the morning, and then the male sits on the nest at night. So then there's a ladies' night situation, which is always fun. We always root for ladies' night. And like just that's just a small example,
Sure.
but these are ways that we can introduce folks to birding that reflects in some ways our own humanity. Whether we're talking about birding for freedom or we're talking about how birding behavior actually exploits what our expectations are around gender and sex.
Hmm.
So, I find that there's a lot of opportunities to introduce more folks to birding in a lot of different ways.
I think that's really fun. And I'm definitely going to get some time with you outside, probably many times this summer in particular, and definitely in the fall when everybody starts to leave. But one of the things that you touched on that's really resonating with me too is kind of how Trust for Public Land talks about public lands, how we talk about this is the public lands are the middle ground for all of us. It's the one thing that, regardless of identity, we can all agree on as a source for us to come and just be ourselves. But there's a similar narrative around who goes outside and what you're supposed to wear and what you're supposed to do when you get to the place and all of these different kind of characteristics that are kind of misattributed to what it means to be a person who goes outside to go hiking or to go climbing or camping and what have you. And so it sounds like there's something very similar there with the birding, that kind of binary thinking in terms of who does and who doesn't, and what you're supposed to kind of represent when you get to this place. And so I'm really appreciative of kind of opening the door, spreading our wings, if you will, our mental
And
wings.
I shall.
And you can
Mm,
spreading our
thank you.
mental wings around how we think about this work, is because the same holds true for public land and public spaces. I mean, it's for everybody, and it's the great unifier. And I think birds can very much be that too. I love that.
Yeah, birds don't care about borders. Birds don't care about the names of places. They much don't care for people. And yet they have done so much to connect us to place, to connect us to a shared history of moving people, of moving wildlife, and the ongoing story of land. I mean, part of what makes a bird remarkable, part of what could make a bird remarkable is its rareness, its rarity. And that question of how is this bird rare brings you ultimately to the question of how did we get here? How did we get here to share this moment? This bird that should be migrating from Bogota, Colombia, in a month is instead here a month early. How did you get here? A bird whose habitat is not this bird is not familiar with the habitat that we are in, that I'm seeing it right now, and yet it is here sharing this moment, hopefully moving on to find a habitat where it can have food and shelter and find mates, but it is outside of its regular habitat. That's another type of rare bird that ultimately gets you to that question of how did you get here? How did we get here? And that
Mhm.
deeper question certainly involves land and how land has been in the ongoing history of, geologic time is one thing, but in political time, how land has been taken and renamed and repurposed, exploited, and stories told on it that um, may not fully capture or appreciate that connection that we should share between the constant moving of people, the historic moving of people and wildlife, as we should also understand land is a story that is ongoing.
I know that you and I have a propensity to talk for hours. It's so easy. It's so easy. I enjoy it. I want to come to a close.
Mhm.
We talked about being happiest outside. We talked about the need for transformation and how we can look at birds as models of transformation. And now you're talking about adaptability. We've talked about civil rights. We've talked about a lot of things in like 20 minutes. It's amazing. To close this out, though, I want to know if there's one closing thought. If we're going to kind of do this as a sandwich and thinking about being happiest outside, one closing thought that you want to share with people around birding and being happiest outside.
As I said before, being happiest outside, I'm birding and I'm sharing that story about birds. Birding can be an exercise of sharing perspectives. I love birding with folks because while I may only be able to see the shape of a bird because the sunlight is hitting it just so, I mostly just see a silhouette. It has like a crest, a long tail relative to the body. But because of the way the sun's hitting it, I can't see any colors. But you, on the other hand, you're over there on the other side of the tree, let's say. You could see like this dash of red, darting around in the canopy, trying to make sense of it. And it is us sharing our perspectives that we figure out that's a cardinal. And that's sharing a perspective and sharing an experience. So I'm happiest outside when I'm birding.
Hey, everybody. I am Rhonda Lee Chapman, your host, and I'm with
CJ Golding from Boys in the Wood.
Awesome. And we're here to talk to you about what makes us happiest outside. Really, what makes CJ happiest outside. So I'm going to do a pan view. CJ is going to disappear for a moment, and I want you all to see where we are out here in Colorado. We are on a Red Rock Trail heading up to, I believe it's called the Morrison Peak. And we thought, what better way to talk about being happiest outside than being outside? So this was definitely not a Zoom conversation. So CJ,
IRL.
IRL, awesome. So CJ, can you talk to me and everybody that's listening about what makes you happiest outside?
So ever since I was a kid, I would love exploring. I'd explore my grandmother's garden. My brother and I would ride our bikes on the train tracks as far as we could go. And I always wanted to see what was over the next hill, what was in the dirt in and around me. And as an adult, I haven't lost that. Some of my favorite places that make me happiest outside are places like North Cascades National Park and the green waters of Lake Diablo, the North Grand Teton National Park, and how big the mountains are. And so I feel, as a human, I feel like walls are a container and a box for us. And outside just gives you so much more freedom to be and to explore and to get into so many other things. And that's part of what makes me happiest outside.
Can you tell me a little bit about your brain? So when you say, I've had an opportunity to talk with you quite a bit, and I love your brain. And so when you're outside of those boxes, you were talking about seeing what's on the other side.
Yeah.
You were talking about looking around to see what's in the dirt, etc.
Yeah.
But are there other things that are happening for your brain and your mind when you're outside of that box that is the indoors?
Yeah, there's a lot of research and studies that show that nature brain it activates different parts of your brain. It activates all of the things that you're able to pay attention to. It stimulates and activates your brain. And so I get to activate the curious parts of my brain. I also get to activate the innovative and creative parts of my brain. As someone who likes taking photos and telling stories through photos, I look at a leaf and I can see an angle. I look at the rock formation and I can see a photo. And so it like both stimulates it in a positive, healthy way, but then it activates these different left brain, right brain kind of things as well.
I love that. You know, one of the things that I appreciate is something that somebody else illuminated for me a long time ago. And that is when I'm outside and I see trees in the wintertime and they're bare and you can see their shape, like their whole infrastructure, and it looks like our lungs.
Yes.
And the relationship between like our bronchial pathways and how it looks just like trees. And then when I think about climate change and I think about the benefits of trees and what they do for us, and how planting them helps us breathe better because of the carbon sequestration and all the good air scrubbing. And I think about how our bodies, if we allow ourselves to explore the idea, are really patterned after nature.
Yeah.
In so many ways. I think that's kind of cool.
Because we are a part of nature, and so I think sometimes we spend a lot of time inside and separate ourselves from nature, and our bodies forget that connection.
Yeah.
And so I'm part of the reason I'm happiest in nature is because I'm regrounded, I'm reconnected, I'm home. I'm like back home where I belong, where we as humans belong. And so
Yeah.
it's a key part of my happiness.
I love that. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm very happy to be outside and my fingers are freezing. So we're going to take a pause and we'll come back when we reach the top of the mountain.
I might hold it next time.
All right, I'm going to put my gloves on.
Sure.
Okay, peace. Okay, so we're back. CJ, you were sharing some information about kind of the mental aspects and the curiosity and the innovation of what it takes to be happiest outside, or what it means to be happiest outside for you. And one of the things I was thinking about was how we even came to know each other, and being in this kind of environmental, social justice, community-based, community-centered work that we do. And I was curious if you could say a little bit more about kind of the expansiveness of being connected to the outdoors and how it's influenced other parts of your life. So in other words, like maybe your vocation, the work that you do, the community work.
Yeah.
A little bit about Boys in the Woods.
Yeah. Sure. So part of me being happy in the outdoors means I want to facilitate or create those kind of spaces for other people as well. I know that I feel happiest when I'm outdoors, and the things that it unlocks, I want to do the same for others. And so that led to me and my co-founder Ron Griswold starting Boys in the Wood, which is a nonprofit organization, and we center Black men, mental health and well-being, and time spent in nature. Our goal is to use nature as a tool to help Black men restore and reignite the best versions of themselves. And happiness is part of being the best version of ourselves. I always like to talk about freedom being the both dreaming and doing, and nature gives us the context, gives us like the ability and the space to pause, to reset, to explore different parts of ourselves, to there's opportunities for joy in nature. And we at Boys in the Wood, we create a space for Black men to build community and in nature, to connect to nature in ways they may have either forgotten or new ways that they haven't done so before, and use all of that happiness as a fuel, like to fill up their tank, so that they're able to then address things like personal development. They're able to address things like their mental health. They're able to form stronger connections with one another, and use nature when they go back home in their day-to-day lives.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for that. We're probably going to come back, and I'm going to ask you some more questions.
Okay.
And we'll kind of keep the conversation flowing. Is that cool?
Okay.
All right.
Snow.
Snow in April. Sometimes it snows in April. Prince.
I don't know that song.
Oh my God.
You can't keep that in the recording.
Keep it in the recording. So, we've had a conversation about the things that make you happiest outside, and then you were kind enough to provide us with a bridge around that happiness that you've experienced and how you want to provide opportunities for others to have the same exposure, opportunity, access, safety, support for being outside, in particular for Black men. And you know, we don't have time to go into all the historical components as to why that is so critical, and how when Black men are happy, everybody's happy. And when everybody else is happy, Black men are as well. So that's my own riff on it. But I I'm curious in just these last few minutes if you could share a little bit about what might be a call to action, or what might be the kind of lasting or lingering message that you want to put out to anybody that's listening.
Yeah. So I think you said it pretty well just now. Marshall Gens has this power of storytelling tool that we use, where he starts with the story of self, then he starts with the story of us, like what we do in community, and then it goes to the story of now. It's like, what action do we take? And I think the action, at least the action that I'm encouraging people to take, is to continue to actively, engage in nature, be in those happy place, find your happy place outside and engage in nature, and to not only bring others along, but do what you can to remove some of those barriers for other people as well. I really think that we live in a world where we don't reach our full potential because we don't spend time in that place of like promise, or in that place of potential, in that space where we're happy and then we get to see what comes after that happiness. And so I would just encourage people to invest in your own happiness. I think I go outside to fill up my reservoir of happiness for the times where things are rough. And so just invest in your happiness, connect other people to those happy places you find outside, and do whatever you can. Everybody has tools and the potential to change things, to remove barriers for other people to engage in the outdoors in that way, in whatever way you can.
Awesome. Are you happy right now in the snow with me?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even when we take little detours.
Even when we take little detours, like the one we were just on, and we rely upon technology, thank you, All Trails, to get us back on course, because we were happy. We were having a good time, and we weren't paying attention. So that's kind of a gift. And so the message here too includes also be prepared. We have layers of clothing, we have water, we have food, sustenance, we have battery packs in case somebody's phone dies. So it's great to be happy outdoors, but you also need to be prepared.
Preparation helps happiness, for sure.
Peace.
Good job. Good safe seat in your saddle. Nice, Whit. Great job.
I'm Deborah Williams, and in addition to being Whit's mom, I am the editorial director for Trust for Public Land.
How often do you all come here, and where are we?
Yeah, so we are at Affinity Ranch in Elizabeth, Colorado, and we come once a week for horse-assisted therapy for my almost 12-year-old son, who has autism and ADHD and some other gifts that we support through programs like this.
All right, I'm gonna open the gate before you get there.
Okay.
They're gonna come open the gate, so I guess we should get out of the way. It's a nice warm-up. Gosh, I know for me, I'm actually feeling pretty calm myself.
Can you tell your horse to whoa? Good job, buddy. All right, let's walk on. You tell your horse to walk on.
So I'm appreciating the literal hands-on support. So we've got 4 people and 3 people who are providing that hands-on support, and then we have the 4th person who's providing the verbal support, and then we've got this one right here who is super jealous. You know, this episode is for the Happiest Outside campaign that we've launched for the month of April. We're always big fans of organizational campaigns especially for things like connecting people to the outdoors and talking about equitable spaces and equitable access to the outdoors. And the location where we are and this form of therapy, for my estimation, is one incredible example of what access to the outdoors looks like, what it feels like. It's getting here, it's being here, it's having individuals who are dedicated to providing that access, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. And I think that's thrilling. And I don't know how often we talk about nature in the form of a horse and being outside with other people. And I would love to hear from you a little bit about how Whit is happy out here and kind of some of the impacts of that happiness on you and your relationship as a mom.
Something that we've noticed about Whit, and from a very young age, and that is quite common for people with autism, is, and I think for most humans, he does markedly better in terms of his communication, his behavior, his connectedness to other people when he's outside. And that's been true from the time that he was really young. And so just to meet his own needs of just feeling grounded and comfortable in himself and sort of available to be connected with other people, since that's one of the challenges with autism is social connectedness, being outside is sort of the first step for that. So whether it's horseback riding or we spend a ton of time hiking and skiing and biking and being in nature as much as we can. This program in particular, like you said, is not only working on helping him build some of his like physical skills and things like balance and communication, but it also sort of teaches him how to be one with another living being. And I don't know the science behind it, but there are incredible stories of kids just really connecting and improving their behavior and their attention, and sort of their presentness when they're connected with a horse. So, and then also just when we think about like connection to the outdoors, for him, being connected to the outdoors also really makes him available to be connected to other people. So it's a double bonus for us. When he's inside, he just often, I think, feels trapped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And confined.
Yeah. Yeah.
In his own body and in the space, and somehow does not seem that way whenever he's outside. It's a place where he's celebrated, not tolerated, and he's just more relaxed.
Before I ask you to wrap up for us, give us the outro, any high-level takeaways from all three segments, thinking about happiest outside? You know, I actually will ask you about one thing that came up with Deborah. It was the celebrate, don't tolerate mantra.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sentiment, she attributed it to somebody else whose name I can't remember. So she wanted to be clear, like she didn't make it up. But this practice and this philosophy of doing more than just tolerating people who might be different from us as individuals, but celebrating them instead, I think is an invitation to all of us in every circumstance that we encounter. One of the things I took away from that is the amount of liberatory freedom that can come when you give yourself and others permission to exist. We don't have to understand the choices that people are making. We have a lot that we can learn and celebrate from individuals, but not everybody's choice is ours to question. But when you see somebody having an experience that might be different from your experience, just be glad that they're having it and celebrate the fact that they're out there doing the thing. You know, I don't know. This might sound really simplified, but I'm not comfortable around mimes. Mimes make.
Didn't know that. When's your birthday? I'm dressing up as a mime, and I'm bringing you some cupcakes.
Yeah, I won't open the door, but but I'll be happy for you, and I'm not going to understand.
You'll celebrate me and my mime.
I'm going to celebrate you. So pleased that you're happy being a mime, that you took the time to become one, and I don't understand it, but I'm so glad for you.
Mime.
Yeah, then there's just the philosophy of celebrating and not tolerating. The moment you decide to tap into your heart and celebrate people, the moment your heart gets bigger. And being able to take that on as a practice feels like something we should all keep in mind and act on all the time.
I love that. Okay, well, I think that about wraps up another show for us. Rhonda, would you mind taking us out with our outro?
You don't mind. People, Nature, Big Ideas is produced by the Trust for Public Land in partnership with Pretty Good Productions. Our executive producer is Thomas Clayton Miller. Our senior producer is Vanessa Martin, and our associate producer is Alyssa Morley. If you like the show, please give us a rating on iTunes and maybe mention us to a friend or two. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Peace.